This morning we're in Sheehy Motors in Nass, and their Volkswagen dealership here has something very exciting. It's the new flagship Volkswagen EV, the ID.7. And we're getting a sneaky preview of it here, and we're going to get to go for a little bit of a drive. So first up, in terms of prices, they start at about 56,000 euros. Now that's including your grants. And I have to say, for that, it's pretty well priced on the market. So what are our first impressions? Well, to begin with, it's a lot bigger than I expected in the flesh. It's quite high. Obviously, I'm quite a tall person. It's about waist high here. It's bigger than a Tesla Model 3, which is what I similarly saw at the size. And it's also a lot bigger than an Ioniq 6. Now, I do like the front. You've got the Volkswagen IQ lights as standard, the light bar across the front, which is kind of somewhat renowned with the ID section of Volkswagen. Then as we make our way along the side, it's a little bit more of a saloon than we saw in some of the other cars like the ID.4 and the ID.5. And then round the back here, it's actually a hatchback. We'll be talking about that later, but there's very few options on the market when it comes to hatchback saloons with loads of boot space. This is an electric car, so we have to start by talking about the battery size and range. So it has a 77 kilowatt hour usable battery, which is pretty big, and that has a range of up to WLTP figure of 621 kilometers, which is incredible, and that comes down to how aerodynamic it is, which we'll talk about in a moment. Now, in terms of the real world range, I'd say you could probably get mid 500s on a nice day. Also, in terms of charging, I quite like the way this new charge port opens. Good job, Volkswagen. And there is, of course, fast charging, up to 175 kilowatts. If we translate that into time, if you find a fast charger, you should be able to go from about 10 to 80% in around a half an hour. However, ideally, you want to be charging this up at home because it's also more practical and a lot more affordable. But I want to talk about the electric motor and also the aerodynamics. So the electric motor underneath the bonnet, it's actually a more efficient electric motor than something you get in an ID.4 or an ID.5. And actually, a quick side note, this is what the bonnet of an electric car looks like. Some of them have a little bit of storage in here as well. And really, you'd never be going in here unless you were topping up your windscreen washer fluid. But also, let's talk about aerodynamics, because if I'm not mistaken, this could be Volkswagen's most aerodynamic car ever. It has a drag coefficient of 0.25, which is marginally less efficient than a Hyundai Ioniq 6, but it's also very, very aerodynamic. You can see there's channels through there, and it just cuts through the road, and it actually means it's got quite a silent drive to it as well. So the interior, well, if you've been in any kind of modern Volkswagen ID car, it's somewhat similar. However, it's a little bit more upgraded and there's a few nice features. I will caveat by saying this car is more or less entry level, very well spec'd entry. It has a few upgrades, including the alloy wheels, this blue stitching, which I think in the interior does a great job, and a few other small little features. But as a whole, storage wise, excellent. Wireless charging there, drink holders, massive deep storage here, glove compartment, it's got it all. Then you've got this big, I think it's a 15-inch screen, and it's really, really good. They seem to have solved some of the lagging problems that we had in the early ID.3s, for example. Another thing they've solved is this now lights up at night time, so you can adjust your volume and you can actually see what you're doing, as well as your climate control. This system, I don't have time to go into it in depth. It's very, very good. Obviously, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, it all connects up, and it's absolutely fantastic. If you want to learn a little bit more about that, then you can watch some of our other Volkswagen cars. We'll leave the link up there. Then in front of us here, we've got this tiny little slim screen, which has all the information you need, and we also have a heads-up display in front of us. Now, I want to say this is really nice, because if you get in a Tesla Model 3, for example, you only have a center screen. So when you're driving along to look at your speed, it's here. And Volvo are doing the same with their new EX30. Steering wheel's lovely, it's haptic feedback buttons on it, which I don't adore, but they are what they are. To put it into gear, it's got this little shift knob here, which we've seen in all the ID cars. And one last thing I want to point your attention to is ISOFIX points in the front, so you can have 3 child seats, which is very, very practical for parents. Now, to drive, although it's quite a long car, it's not very wide, which is quite nice on Irish roads. I have found a lot of cars nowadays are very, very wide, and on thin streets, you find yourself struggling to fit past, whereas that's not a problem in the ID.7. I will say rear visibility, not incredible. However, you have nice big mirrors, and actually if you're reversing into a parking spot, you have an overhead camera, you have a reversing camera. It's all very well put together, and it is easy to kind of navigate into tight spots. It's rear wheel drive, which obviously most ID cars are, unless you get a GTX version, which I believe will be coming for the ID.7. But in terms of rear wheel drive, it's just something to bear in mind because it's actually quite quick. 286 brake horsepower, and when that goes all to the rear in a high torque electric car, you can find on the colder days it's a little bit twitchy. However, Volkswagen have a very sophisticated traction control system, so it should be all good. And actually it's got a nice pickup on it. You might have just heard a beeping there, and that is new regulation. We've mentioned this in cars like the Kia EV9 or the Hyundai Ioniq 6. It's new European regulation that when you go over the speed limit, the car will beep at you. Now you can turn it off, but you have to do it every time you get into the car. It's all safety. It's going to be in every new car going forward, but it's one thing to bear in mind. And as a whole, driving this around town has been lovely. As I said, it's a great size. It's very smooth. The suspension is really, really well dampened. And actually one big thing that I want to talk about is because it's so aerodynamic, you notice that you don't have any noise over those wing mirrors, and often you can get that in EVs because there's no engine noise, so you start to notice other little noises, but you don't get any of that in this. It's actually very quiet. Now lastly, what I want to touch on is the driving aids. We mentioned brilliant reversing cameras, overhead cameras, the works, but also when you get it out onto the open road, of course, you've got all your driving aids. So if I go onto my haptic feedback and I click set on my cruise control, it will set my speed, but then it will also adapt it to the car in front of me. And what's more is because this has speed sign recognition, if the speed limit changes, it can actually slow it down for me. So it's really, really modern, really, really good. And it also has lane assist, which obviously keeps you centered in lane. It will take corners for you. Obviously you don't drive with your hands off the wheel, but it helps a lot. And the new update that will come will allow it to, when you're on a motorway and you want to change lane, you just indicate it, it will actually change lane for you. So it's getting really, really, really high tech, which is excellent. In terms of driving modes, there are a number of different ones, everything from eco up to sport, and then you can even do individual and set it up as you like. But I will talk about if you put it over here into B mode, that is regenerative braking. We've spoke about it so much, and if you'd like to learn more, you can hit this video up here. However, it makes a big difference. So as I come up to this left-hand turn, I'm just taking my foot off the accelerator. I'm not putting it on the brakes, and it will actually slow right down for me. It makes life so much easier. At first it feels weird, but you'll love it. As a whole, to drive, it's very much what I expected. It's probably a little bit smoother, a little bit calmer than I probably anticipated, but it's very, very good. Volkswagen have done a superb job for rear passengers. It's like a BMW i7 in terms of leg space, absolutely tons, and actually pretty decent headroom too. Isofix points, and they're just, being Volkswagen, they're nice and tidily kept away. You also have an armrest here, which has 2 drink holders. And then this car has got heated and cooled rear seats. That's also one optional extra. Heated seats in the front come as standard, but then cooled seats or ventilated seats are an optional extra. But I want to show you the boot because that is one of the ID.7's party pieces. Of course, it has an electric tailgate. I'd expect no less from an ID.7, and actually the boot space here, it's really big. 532 litres, and for context, the Golf is about 380, so it's substantially bigger. It's also quite practical. There's some storage down here. There's a place to put your charge cables underneath here, and at the pull of a lever, you can fold those rear seats. And actually, I can't think of any other electric cars, not SUVs, electric cars that have a big hatchback boot like this. The only one I've been able to think of is a Mercedes-Benz EQS, and that's about another 80,000 euros. And what's more is I think that there's going to be an estate version of the ID.7 coming in the near-ish future, which will be very practical. There you have a first look at the new ID.7, and I have to say, to begin with, it's priced a lot better than I thought it would be. It's a lot bigger than I thought it would be, which is quite nice, and it's also a very good looking car. I've really enjoyed driving it. I definitely look forward to really putting that range through the test as we maybe get one on a bit of a longer test. But a big thanks to Sheehy's Volkswagen in Nass for having us out to test it so early. I've really enjoyed it and appreciate it massively. And if you would like to search for any electric cars on DoneDeal, then hit the link up there. We've got over 1,000 trusted dealerships all around Ireland. And that's it for now. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.